on today's Story Beat.
What I do when I read the literary books, let's say I'm reading from Bolaño, right, while I'm writing Metropolis. So I stop, finish a little chapter, finish a section, and then I open up, I'm looking at my iPad, read my stuff. How is it reading? How's it comparing? I want to know that I'm writing at the same level. I need to know that. And if I'm not, then I need to write a little bit better.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on Story Beat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, the novelist Monte Schulz, published his first novel, Down by the River, in 1990, and then spent the next 12 years writing 3 books focused on the Jazz Age, This Side of Jordan, The Last Rose of Summer, and The Big Town, all of which can be found together in the single book Crossing Eden, which he wrote for his father, the late, extraordinarily influential cartoonist, the creator of Peanuts, Charles M. Schulz. Monte's latest novel, Metropolis, is a grand dystopian tale in a time of war, with a blossoming romance throughout. I've read Metropolis and can tell you it's a powerful and intense journey through a world into which I hope we never find ourselves. If you enjoy marvelously epic storytelling, I highly recommend you read Metropolis. Since 2010, Monte has been the owner of the Santa Barbara Writers Conference and has taught a class in voice and style both there and at UC Santa Barbara. He's also a composer-songwriter with an album out worldwide, Seraphonium After Many a Summer. So for those reasons and many more, I'm beyond honored and truly thrilled to welcome the brilliant writer Monte Schulz to StoryBeat today. Monte, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
It's a great pleasure to have you. So let's go back in time a little bit. Where did you first get the notion that you wanted to write books, novels? When did that start for you?
Actually, it started after when I was finishing graduate school, because I started writing poetry and music, actually music, then poetry when I was about 20 years old. And so my first, say, 4 years of writing really were in music and then poetry. But my dad, seeing I had a gift for lyrical language, gave me Carl Sandburg's complete poems to read and Eddie Masters' Spoon River Anthology. Also, book by Joan Didion. He had me read some lyrical passages from Thomas Wolfe in Uptime on the River and Look Homeward Angel. Had me read the tortoise crossing the road scene in Steinbeck's, what was his famous novel? I forget.
Either The Grapes of Wrath or Of Mice and Men?
The Grapes of Wrath. Yeah, really great. It's a great scene. So I started writing, getting the idea of a book. I wanted to write a great American novel. Like East of Eden. And so I started writing, and it was not very good. So then I wrote a novel based on my time at a private school one year, and that was okay. I read it. I mean, I wrote it, but I didn't reread it because I knew it wasn't all that good. It had some good stuff in it. And then I finished my master's thesis. While I was writing my master's thesis, I read a lot of supermarket paperback slasher novels and crime novels and whatever. And so I decided I would write a book like that. And I wrote 90 pages of scenes, people getting killed, and then I couldn't figure out what else was going to happen. So I wrote my master's thesis on small town America. And then one afternoon, I read those scenes on my computer, and they're way better than I remember them. And I got the idea of grafting a small town novel onto these killing scenes. And rather than having a serial killer, it made it a mystery. And that ended up being my first novel, Down by the River.
Huh. And were you always a reader as a kid? Were you a big reader?
Yeah. But I would read, say, I read H.G. Wells and Jules Verne and Ray Bradbury and other short science fiction stories. The fiction I write now, I don't think I would have read when I was younger. I wouldn't have. I just became a different writer, and my interests were different later on.
Well, everyone's tastes change over time, don't they?
Right, but I also read. Dad had me read the Tintin books. Those comics with
Sure.
Hergé. I loved all those, so I liked adventure stories, and so you can see some of that influence in Metropolis, right? So I like
Absolutely.
I like reading books where things happen. I also write like literary books where the language is beautiful. So I read very widely in a lot of different things. So.
You have a varied, eclectic taste as to what you like to read.
Yeah, I like reading books that are page turners. Like I'm always reading at least 2 books at once, and one can be a literary novel and one can be a page turner. Ultimately, I like the literary novels the best because they stay with me, but I also like to be entertained. So it's hard for me to read commercial novels. The writing is not very good, but the storytelling is good. I can't remember, what happens in those books. But the literary novels, also the literary novels have to have something happen. I can't read literary novels where nothing happens. The whole book is just beautiful writing and all interior drama and nothing happens. I find the book ultimately kind of boring.
Me either. I do like a good popcorn drama. I like the Lee Childs of the world and Stephen King and so on.
Yeah, I read all of those. Yeah. But I also read the late Chilean writer Roberto Bolaño, really fantastic writer, and Paul Bowles and Cormac McCarthy, and I love all those. I read both.
Well, nobody gets more violent than Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, he's bloody as all get out, and he writes brilliantly.
Yeah, he's a really great writer. Probably the greatest writer in America. But again, I just read a lot of fiction, and I read nonfiction as well. So again, Joan Didion was one of my favorite writers, and so I just try to read a lot of different things.
So did you get your training as a writer in school?
I had a writing mentor as an undergraduate, Gerald Rosen at Sonoma State University, really, really good writer. His first novel is just the best title, Blues for a Dying Nation. He was really great. And then when I was in school, he would just published the Carmen Miranda Memorial Flagpole, which is a really funny book. And then he wrote another novel. I can't remember the title, Dr. Ebenezer or something. He actually came to my book signing in San Francisco for the part of the 20s novel, This Side of Jordan, when it came out. And he had just survived leukemia. He came to my signing. We talked for a long while. And then a few months later, his wife called me and told me he died.
Oh.
So, but my second, and he's one of the 2 people I dedicated Metropolis to. And the second one is Stephen Alabak, who was my then writer mentor when I was in graduate school at UC Santa Barbara. He was just over here a couple of weeks ago. He'd read Metropolis and really loved it. And I asked both of them if they thought, with all the students, if they thought that I was going to be, did they know I was going to be a writer and publish books? And they both said yes. They said, because you seem really serious about it, which was good.
About being a writer.
About writing, yeah. I mean, you think that all writers would be, but when I taught at UC Santa Barbara in the College of Creative Studies, I had 8 writers per class, and they all seemed like pretty good writers. The question was how much they would write after school. And I said, all of you could be writers, but I'm not sure that any of you will be, because you have what I guess they call protected time in school to be a writer. Afterwards, there's work and romance and holidays and other interests come and go, and maybe writing seemed like something to do at the time, but is not something to follow later on.
I've been teaching screenwriting here in Pittsburgh for the last 12, 13 years, and it's the same thing. You can't really tell who's going to have success and whether they'll stick to it or not.
No, that's a sort of thing. And you certainly can't have people in it for the money. That becomes a problem too, particularly with writing fiction, because there's really not that much money in it. Few writers ever make money. And those that do are sort of made out in the industry to be really great writers, when in fact most of them are not. The best writers really don't make that much money writing. Average advance for a novel is $5,000. So
right.
Work at Kmart make more money than that.
For sure.
But on the other hand, the serious writers are not deterred by that at all. They're not deterred by economics, and they're not deterred by commercial success or lack thereof. They just write. Cormac McCarthy, for example, until All the Pretty Horses, as I understand it, was never selling more than maybe 3,000 copies of 3,000 copies of any of his books. Beyond, but he didn't really care. There's a story I guess he told about he and his wife Annie were living by a lake, and they didn't even have a bath, so they're having to bathe in the lake. And she finally, oh yeah, he was offered, I think, as I understand the story, something like he was offered $5,000 to give a talk at like one of the universities, and he turned it down. And she said, "What? You have to do it." "No, I'm not going. I told you I'm not going to do that." He doesn't talk about writing. And so at one point she left, and then he had no toothpaste. He had no toothpaste, but a little, his little boxes showed up in the mail, with samples. He said, "So see, the universe is telling me it's okay." So he moved on. But dedication to writing it has to be a lifelong endeavor.
Well, for sure. And real writers don't write for the money. They write for, I shouldn't say that. I'm sure there are some who do, especially the ones that become successful, then write for money. But
Right.
But most true dedicated writers, the money is not the object. It's writing, is getting it out of your system.
Right, because you can't tell what's going to go, what's going to be popular.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say few of the very best writers made a lot of money at it. Few. A lot of commercial writers make tons of money, and they're not necessarily really great writers. Some are just really great storytellers. I love Stephen King. I don't. He's consistent. I like him. He's not really a great writer, but he's a great storyteller. So I read all his books, so I can say that. Steve.
He is a great storyteller. That's
Yeah,
what he is.
Yeah, same with John Grisham. John Grisham, I think, is a better writer than Stephen King, but they're both great storytellers. They're really different, right? I really like Lee Child. I like John Sanford. One who sort of crosses those boundaries is James Lee Burke, a great writer and a great storyteller, great literary writer who writes crime fiction, really great writer. So again, Roberto Bolaño is a great storyteller and a really great writer, different from those writers in that he's really a literary writer. He's beyond his literary gift is beyond theirs. Paul Bowles, yeah.
Paul Bowles and Dean Koontz, people like that, they're all sort of in that group.
Well, Dean Koontz he's not a literary writer. He's a commercial writer, but he's a really good storyteller. Really good.
Yeah.
He had a series of books with this I don't know, sort of a killer person, Jane something. She was fighting against some conspiracy. And those 4 books, I can't remember what they're called now, but I love them. I was sad when the series ended. He is a really great storyteller.
Well, so I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, and I don't want to dwell on your father because it's about you, but what influence did your father as a storyteller have on you? Because he was telling stories in 4 panels. And he was a great storyteller in very little chunks. What influence did he have on your thinking as a writer or your?
No, his influence on me was reading literary fiction. He didn't like commercial fiction really at all. He just didn't. He liked literary writing. So his influence on me as far as storytelling was, again, was reading the Tintin books, right? Hergé's with Tintin and Snowy and Captain Haddock and Thompson Twins. I loved all those books. They taught me storytelling and imagery and adventure. But Dad loved Thomas Wolfe. He loved Steinbeck. A writer that we never get a chance to talk about because he died before I read the books was James Gould Cousins, who wrote The Just and the Unjust, and then one of Dad's favorite books, By Love Possessed. When Dad died, I inherited a bunch of his books. So through that, I read James Jones novels. I think I'd read From Here to Eternity before he died, but I found his copy of The Thin Red Line, and then the novel Whistle, which is great, and The Soldier. And I love James Jones a lot. So I read his books. Sloan Wilson, who wrote A Summer Place and The Man in the Flannel Suit, Great Flannel Suit. I read those books after he died. So those are the type of books that the Dad loved. And so he was interested in language. He wouldn't say, "Oh, read this book, really great story." He would say, look at this passage. He loved the great passages.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it, considering what he did for a living? He was into passages.
Right. I think that's probably true. I hadn't really thought of it before, but that's probably the case. But he did read a lot. And when I was old enough to, I think I introduced him to Cormac McCarthy. So he said he was pleased when I finally got to the age where we could talk about books, and then we could share books back and forth. So I met Joan Didion through him at the Santa Barbara Writers Conference. She spoke there, and she spoke one year, and he had a signed copy of Slouching Towards Bethlehem. And then when she showed up at the conference with the White Album, I remember seeing her and John Gregory Dunn come in, and they're on their way across this sort of a barbecue lawn pool thing to go say dad, be dad. I didn't know she remembered me. I wanted to get up, but I was too shy. So I was lying back in a chaise, and she walks over to me and she goes, hi, Monty, I'm Joan Didion. I don't know if you remember me, but glad to meet you again. I was so flattered. And she signed my copy of the White Album. And my favorite, one of my favorite novelists, Carson McCullers, came from my dad. Influence to read that, the Member of the Wedding and The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. I remember telling about Carson McCullers. And then he also had an old copy of Truman Capote's first novel, Other Voices, Other Rooms, that I read because of Dad. So those writers, that came from my dad, and they're very lyrical writers.
He then, I assume, was a fairly deep reader then. He read a lot.
Yeah, he read all the time. He always had multiple books going at once.
Interesting.
And in fiction and nonfiction.
So that's where a lot of, I have to guess, a lot of the philosophy within Peanuts came from his deep reading of people who were deep writers.
Sure. Yeah.
That's really great.
I was surprised that he didn't like commercial fiction really at all. I don't know why. He just didn't. We never really talked about it. He just didn't like it that much. So I don't know. It's interesting.
He got to read some of your work, didn't he?
Oh yeah. So the only thing you didn't quite get right there in the introduction was the novels set in the Jazz Age. It wasn't 3 books that I turned into one. It was 1 book that we decided to split into 3, Crossing Eden. I wrote that, and there are 4 vignettes. There are 4, I call them interludes, in the middle, and those are 3 of the 4 are interviews I did with my dad and my dad's cousin. So there's a lot of family biography in Crossing Eden. And he read all of that except for the epilogue that I felt I couldn't write until he died. And then he died and I wrote it. So that's really probably the best book I've ever written. It's an American book. It's my attempt at the great American novel. And it took me really, it's kind of funny to say it took me 12 years because all in all, it probably took me even longer, maybe 15 years. The basic manuscript 10, he read the whole thing again, except for that, and it hadn't been edited. So it's better now than it was when he read it when he was alive. But he loved how I wrote. And I found that gratifying. It just took me, it was just a long book. It was really hard to write. I just was learning how to write when I was writing that. But I think it's a great book. I think I was telling my professor, Steve Ellerback, that we're talking about the great American novel. I said, so you have to read Crossing Eden and tell me there's another book that's a better great American novel. But it just came and went, like nobody paid any attention to it at all. I don't think I even got any reviews on it. Whatever, right? So it's a really, if you ever get a chance to find it, read it, and then you send me a note. Okay, is this the great American novel? Sure. I think you'll say yes. Given what the description of the great American novel was in the 1920s and time of Thomas Wolfe, the idea was to write a novel that encompassed the most of this huge American society, and in that sense, so when you hear like the Gatsby was a great American novel, it can't be because it's too small. So this essay that talked about that named 3 possible books. One was Of Time in the River, Thomas Wolfe's novel. And they said, well, kind of yes, kind of no. Carl Sandburg's long poem, The People, Yes. They said, yes, it has all the elements of American culture and talking about everything, but it's a poem, not a novel. And then the last one they said was John Dos Passos' USA trilogy. Again, they said, yeah, possibly. And Crossing Eden is, what it is it's 3 novels interconnected as one. You change chapters, you change storylines. The question was for me when I was writing it is there any other book that has 3 storylines occurring simultaneously in different locations? And I never found an example of it. Going to the writers' conference every year, I used to ask them, nobody had an idea until I finished the book, and then I read USA, and I realized that was the model. That would have been it.
But you read USA after you published the book.
Yeah, probably a couple of years after. Yeah.
And you didn't know that it was written that way.
Well, actually, I did. I was reading it. I was reading it. I read it when I was editing the book. So I got ideas for 20s expressions. What I do in that book is you hear people speaking in 20s slang. So it is really pretty accurate too, because after I read the book, then I read a book set in the 30s. God dang it, Studs Lonigan. And the characters speaking using all the stuff that I had I could have read that before and got a lot of these expressions. The most insulting one, this is how this goes, is when Boardwalk Empire came out, everyone's thinking, yeah, it's in the 20s and everything, but they talk just like us. What? And I actually got a review of part of the book when I split it up, where the reviewer actually talked about my phony and contrived language. Oh my God. The guy probably watches Boardwalk Empire and wonders where all these stupid expressions are coming from. Well, dude, read Studs Lanigan, read James T. Barrow. You'll see that's where it's all authentic. So what I did is I read USA and Manhattan Transfer and all the books from that time, and I borrowed expressions, I put them in the way the characters talk. Anyway, so that's what that book was. What we did is we split it apart.
I see.
Thinking that we could sell it more easily. And then I put it back together. Even my publisher didn't get the idea. He said, so it's sort of an omnibus. No. The book was never written like that. It's not like I wrote, so it's 3 parts. It's not like I wrote one and then wrote the other and then the other and then put them together. No. I would write a chapter in one storyline and then go on to the next storyline. And then so sometimes I would go away from one of the storylines for 2 years.
So how would you keep that straight in your head?
Well, Steve Alaback, again, my mentor at UC Santa Barbara, told me that that since I'm going to go away from one of the storylines for so long, each chapter in that storyline had to have its own little story arc. So it's not, you're not really required to remember what went on. You will remember, but you're not required to. Okay, they have their own little sections. So it wasn't hard to. It wasn't really hard to.
So every chapter then is its own sort of little self-contained bit.
Sort of, yeah.
And that then flows into the whole.
The 3 stories take place. So what it is, it's a husband, a wife, and the wife's cousin. The cousin, Alvin Pendergast, is a farm boy, and his story takes place in 5 towns, what they call on the middle border in the Midwest. Right, in Illinois and Kansas and Nebraska and whatever, and then she and her husband has, with a downturn in business, has sent his wife, the character's named Marie, the farm boy's named Alvin. He sent Marie down to his mother's house in East Texas, and that's where her story takes place, in East Texas, the whole time below the Mason-Dixon line. He goes to the city. I just call it the city or the Metropolis. That's where it's a prototypical American city at the time. So you get the urban part, you get a small southern town, and then you get towns in the middle border. And then the part where my dad's stuff came in were these 4, as I said, interludes, where Dad's family is going by along Route 66 to Needles, California, where you see it is mentioned in the strip a bunch. So no, those are all in first person. Otherwise, the rest of the book is all in third person. So the book opens with the line, "Time was when we were young," and traces this sort of story. And at the end, the guy looks back in his whole life and then writes it. And I wrote that epilogue. But anyway, so it was just one big book. It's one big book split into 3.
And you wrote it over 12 to 15 years, is that right?
Geez, yeah, something like that. Yeah, for sure.
Did you have your story worked out before you started into it? How does that work? Did you outline or?
No, I never outlined.
Never outlined.
No, I don't do anything. Just make it up.
Okay, so now let me ask the question again. How do you keep it straight in your head? How do you know where you're going?
Well, I had it on the computer, I guess, and my computer was really slow too. It was taken for one of these chapters, and my old desktop Mac, it was taking a minute to load a chapter. If I had 40-page chapters, taking a minute to load it, and they're all in those little 3.5-inch floppies. Stick it in there, load that one up. I had a stack of them for each of the books. As I divided them up. And then the tricky thing was when we split the book into pieces, the first thing we took out was the Alvin story. I thought, well, okay, it's husband and wife and the cousin. The cousin can be split off. And I called it This Side of Jordan. And that's what came out first. My publisher said it was the cleanest manuscript he'd ever seen. It was pretty well polished. And then the second one we split off was the one with Marie in East Texas. And I had to come up with a title for it. And I called it The Last Rose of Summer. And then the last one I had to do was it just needed work, was her husband Harry Hennessy in the city. I called it The Big Town. That's what they called the city back then, the big town. And that's why it took so long. When I say I'm not sure how you can count how long it took to write, because the epilogue I wrote a couple years after I wrote the rest of the book, but then I had to go in. The Alvin story didn't need any work at all. The Marie story, just I added some scenes, and then the Harry one needed more stuff in the city, and I had improved the plot. So clearly I didn't think that much about it, because I had to make a new plot for this book.
All right, so let's talk about how you get there, which is part of the process.
Right.
Are you a people watcher? Are you an observant person? Are you taking characters out of the ether of your environment, or how do you develop characters?
None of my characters are autobiographical or biographical at all. I just make them up, have an idea, have an imagination. It's usually, for me, the idea is not the person, but the place. And then I put someone in the place. All the images, I have an image of a rural highway, maybe a dirt road running through grass fields, and then put somebody there. And an old house, put somebody in the house, decorate the house, put somebody in the house. In the city, picture out what the city is going to look like, and put somebody there. Characterization. I listen to people talk. I listen to how people use slang. There was at our family ice rink, there was a girl. I use the expression. Some girl said, "Oh, it's something being rad." I said, "That's just short for radical." No, it isn't. Yes, it is. It's short for radical.
Yes,
no, it
is.
isn't. Oh my God, what are you talking about? Wow. So I listen to slang all the time, and then of course in these books, a lot of it is period slang. So I have a really great book. It's called The American Thesaurus of Slang. It's from 1950. It's the greatest book ever for that.
Wow, that's a big, thick book, The American Thesaurus of Slang.
Yeah, it's so great. It has so many. Yeah, you can get it on. I actually got another copy. You can find it on Amazon. It's really fabulous.
So once you have decided, here's a character, this is your protagonist or someone that you're going to follow all the way through, do you then make notes about that character, or is it just in your head?
No. I don't. I heard some people
that's amazing.
write whole biographies of their characters. I can't imagine. I feel the people who do that should spend more time on the language, how they actually write, how some writers, they'll talk about the person lived in a nondescript house. Don't write that. That is your description. Don't say nondescript. Say it's a ranch house, or in my 20s book, it would be a frame house, an old frame house. Okay. Nondescript, those are lazy things. There's all these writing memes I just hate. Like he padded across the room. Why would you say that? That sounds like people don't pad. Why do the things they say are so horrible? There's so many examples of horrible writing. I'm
fascinated that you're able to keep it contained in your brain. That's amazing.
I'm influenced by the writers I read. The characters in a novel are revealed by, if you're not in the character's head, then these characters are revealed by what they say and what they do.
Sure. I was always taught in school that character is what they do or don't do.
That's true. That's half of it. It's also what they say.
Well, sure.
And how they talk. But that's because some characters aren't really doing anything, right? It's what they're saying. So there are two parts to that. It's what they say. But some people don't like, a lot of novelists, it's interesting, they don't really like writing dialogue. Elmore Leonard likes writing dialogue, but I don't think the writer here lives in Santa Barbara, T.C. Boyle, really likes it. And a lot of writers I see they're very narrative heavy. And then the characters say a couple lines and you get 30 pages of narrative again. I don't think they really like writing dialogue. I don't think they're comfortable with it. But the writers I've read, I really like, are really good with dialogue, and interesting dialogue. And how do you say something that it's different? That's what I pay attention to. And I'm sure you saw some of that in Metropolis. The way they talk is just different. You can't predict that line of dialogue. So particularly in the Undercity with Castor and Pollux, that sort of conversation they have with each other, talking to Julian, it's not predictable, those lines, right? The way they say the destiny of bones and those sorts of things, a lot of lines. So language is what really interests me most. Language interests me more than story or character.
Well, the way that they speak, it felt like it was its own world. Metropolis is in, it could be here and now, but it's also not here and now. It's in a different place. And that's how I read it.
Yeah, that's true. That's and if it's influenced by anything, it was influenced by me writing Crossing Eden with the 20s kind of feel. So, and at first I didn't really want to continue that. And I thought about one night, that whole first chapter, sort of switching all those expressions back to just how we would talk normally now. But I hadn't read it in a while. When I read it again, I thought, no, it's all fine. It's not heavily loaded with 20s expressions.
No.
There are some, but not that many. And so in the rest of the book, not everybody speaks the same way.
So in terms of Metropolis, how did you come up with the idea in the first place? What was the impetus for writing a book, an epic that big? It's a big book. It's got a lot of characters. It's got a lot of action in it. It goes in many different locations. How did you even begin the process of coming up with that idea?
Okay, well, that's a complicated answer. First of all, I found my old iBook up in where I used to live up in Nevada City. I hadn't opened it in a long time. Opened it up and looked for the first file, and I saw a file dated, computer file dated June 11th, 2001. So, and I found files here on my computer I'm writing on right now from 2003. So I really started that book, 18, 19 years ago.
Right.
And I gave it up. I gave it up before I even finished writing Crossing Eden or editing it. So that's the first part of it. Okay?
Why did you give it up? You couldn't figure it out?
I couldn't figure out how Julian is able to study the Greeks and the Romans in a fictional republic. I didn't get that. And then I also simultaneously, I couldn't figure out the geography of it. So if they're studying the Greeks and the Romans, where is Greece and Rome in relation to this republic? And it wasn't until the spring of 2019 I figured out the answer to that was that the republic really is France, and the metropolis would be Paris, and the Holy River Livorno would be the Seine, but it's a different world. So a friend of mine from UC Santa Barbara, when I described the book to him, I had only written maybe half of it. He said, "Oh, it's like history bifurcated 1,500 years ago and became this." So and that's what it's like. So the East, those provinces, right, in the East, that would be Germany, Eastern Europe, and into Russia. So that was the structure. So when I figured that out, then it was easy to write. Now, answer to the other question was this really big book. Well, it wasn't supposed to be big. Okay, I thought it'd be maybe 350, 400 pages.
Right.
It became long because, and now you can appreciate this when I tell you because you read the book, I literally made the whole thing up line by line as I was writing it with no plan whatsoever.
That's unbelievable.
No idea. I didn't know that Julian was going to go into the desolation. Okay. I didn't know. I had one sentence or two sentences when he wakes up. He woke up in that room and snowing outside. And I pictured that in one of those Renaissance rooms with those panels and everything. I pictured that. That's all I knew about that part of the book. That's it. And I just made it up. It's just right. I literally made it up. Okay, here's a good example of something I made. I won't give this away for people. But when he comes into that tower and he comes up the stairs, knocks on the door, introduces himself. The woman says, "Hi, I am." She introduced herself to me as she introduced herself to Julian. I did not know that's who she was. I didn't even make the connection to, her son. I didn't make any connection. I made it up. And then we went back to the city again. I thought that's actually the fourth section of the book is the longest. I thought it was going to be really short because I didn't know what else was going to happen there. So you have to picture me just sitting there and making the whole thing up. I didn't have any idea what was going to happen. I just made it up as it were day after day after day after day.
How do you keep yourself from going down dead ends that don't lead anywhere, or do you not?
Okay, here's the other weird thing about that book. Unlike Crossing Eden, which took me 12 years to write because I had no inspiration at all, this book mysteriously was like somebody whispered in my ear for 9 months that took me to write that book. I wrote the whole book in 9 months. So,
9 months.
I had the first 50 pages beforehand, and then I had a couple fragments, like the fragment of the guy, Lancaster, in the jail cell, right at the bottom. I wrote that like 6 years ago. 8 years ago or something. I get the idea. I typed it into my phone in notes, and then I just left it. I was going to use it somehow. I didn't know where or when I was going to use it. So other than that, that's all I had. I had 50 pages and a bunch of little fragment notes. And then I just started, I wrote the whole thing. I had a really interesting writing schedule. This is very critical to the writing of the book. Okay. I decided that I had to write at least one page every morning before I ate or drank anything. Okay, this was what got this book written, or ate or drank anything I had to. So sometimes I was super hungry. So let's say I've gone down to the bottom of the previous page and say it's like 28 lines. So then I have to start down to the bottom and come up and get down to line 28, and that's the page. I had to reach that 28. So sometimes it'd be like, how many lines? I had 12. Oh my God, I still have like 16 to go. How many lines? Oh, you got 10 to go. Oh, you got like 3 to go. Okay, now I can go eat. Sometimes I was really enthused and I would write another page, but I had to write at least one page. And in 9 months, I only missed 3 mornings and I was out of town for those. So that means Thanksgiving morning, Christmas, and New Year's, my birthday, whatever. I just wrote.
Well, so the book has a very good structure. It's a well-structured book. How did you know what the structure would be?
I didn't know. I just wrote it.
You just wrote it.
I had the muses. Seriously, it sounds funny. It's just like all the ideas just came to me. I never had any problems at all. You know, people talk about writer's block. I have to interject this because my dad always, we had a conversation one day where I say this, I use this in the writer's comments all the time for people. People talk about, they'll say, I was blocked for 6 months or blocked for a year or something. Dad said, only amateurs get writer's block. Professionals can't afford it. So that was, and that's a truism for his life.
It's true.
You can't get blocked. You can't get blocked. The strip has to appear. So I've never even considered writer's block. I tell people at the conference, writer's block is two things. One, either being lazy or afraid to write something bad. It's always better to write something bad than nothing at all. So I didn't have any problems in Metropolis at all. I was never blocked at all. I just, in any kind of sense at all, I just would get ideas. I was sort of stumped on one part around when Julian is going to pick up Nina at that grocery store. You know, she's been lost. I couldn't figure, there's something about that. I can't tell you exactly what it is because I don't remember. But I just remember that there was something about that scene that when I figured it out, I solved 3 problems at once when I was stuck. Even trying to figure out how, like who stuffed that note into Julian's back pocket. Where did that come from? I realized, it took a while to figure out who that had to be. But everything just came to me in the book. The book is actually really simple to write.
Is it heavily rewritten or is it as is?
No, I mean, everybody edits. I fixed stuff, polished stuff here and there. The other thing I did was, in the past, what we would do is we would write on the computer, then print it out and read it so as you can see it fresh in another format.
Sure.
I never do that. I stopped doing that a long time ago, but what I did with Metropolis, and I had gone to, by the way, when I finished publishing Crossing Eden, I quit writing books. I started sitting in front of a computer. So that's when I started doing music again, which I did for several years, but it cost too much money and didn't fill my days. So that's when I decided to go back and write another book, which I swore I was never going to do. But what I did was I'd make a save. And after that first page in the morning, again, I would write in the afternoon, 2 or 3 pages, 1 or 2 pages, whatever. And I would save it to Gmail. And then I would read it on my phone. When I go to the store, when I go out to lunch, when I go to dinner, I would read it on the phone. And then at night in bed, while I'm watching TV or reading another book, I was reading on my iPad. So I'm seeing it in a different format right away. So if I saw mistakes, obvious mistakes, I hated doing this, but I would lever myself out of bed, go downstairs, turn the computer on, load the file up and make the correction and then go back upstairs again. It was really hard to see it on the computer too. I never read the book on the computer I wrote it in. I read it on the phone or the iPad.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you think that reading it in a slightly different medium, I guess it would be, helped to spark the way you're looking at it differently?
Helped me catch mistakes and helped me see what I liked and didn't like. Yeah.
Just like the difference between writing it in the computer and then printing it out and seeing it on paper.
Exactly. And I have 2 friends who are writers, and I told them about how I do this, and they both started doing it themselves. They're extremely skeptical at first, and then they said, "Wow, you're right. It really helps doing it like that. See it in just different format. It's completely different because when it comes through Gmail, the font is changed, and I mean not so much the format because it's still I have adjustified margins, but it doesn't show page number or anything. It just shows the text. I still do it in my new book. I do it all the time, but yes, it made a big difference. So I was reading it all the time. So you asked about a clean manuscript. So I'm fixing little things, but no, the Metropolis didn't need any major work at all. All I did in editing, the book is done. Now I got to go edit before I give it to my publisher. And I'm like, so I just went through, try to cut everything I could, which would end up not being that much. After a certain point, if I cut things, the book either doesn't make any sense, like they say about movies, has plot holes. Okay, it's funny when reviewers talk about the movie had a lot of holes in the plot. Well, you know what they never do? They never say what the holes were because I'm sure they don't want to be corrected. What do you mean? No, that's a hole. No, what about that? Oh, well, I didn't notice that. But okay, then that's your problem. Okay, but there were no holes in the plot. If I'd cut stuff, there would have been. The other thing, but what I did cut was maybe the end of some chapters. I thought I went on and on too much or whatever. Cut a paragraph here, a paragraph there. I don't need that. That's redundant. In my new book, Undercity, the main storyline is going to need cutting. Everything is great, but it's like too many Christmases. Okay, it's too much of a good thing. Okay, which means it's probably here and there. It's probably repetitive, and I just have to identify where it's repetitive. Just to pace it a little bit better.
You have huge themes running throughout Metropolis. You've got eugenics and society and culture and war and love, and there are a lot of big themes. Did those occur to you as you were going, or not at all?
Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up because I always, when I'm talking about my book or talking about anything like this, my mind wanders and I get off on a tangent, and I should have answered this right away. So what made me want to write the book? Well, in my other books, Down by the River was kind of a crime novel set in a small town, but in Crossing Eden, there's a lot of interior drama and small lives, and these people are all sort of small life characters and interior lives and whatever. So I wanted to write a book on a big theme. Okay, a big thing. Like for instance, we have characters in their lives in the background or in the foreground of Sophie's Choice, but the background is World War II and the concentration camps and ending with Auschwitz, right? So I wanted to have a book on a big theme. So I thought about writing a war novel, having the war be in the background, and then I got the idea, what's the war going to be about? Well, we'd have it about eugenics. And then I read a book. I bought a book. I haven't read it. I just kind of skimmed through it. I got a lot of ideas from it. Edwin Black's book, a really great book, War Against the Weak, American and Eugenics. It's a really good book. So it just sort of reinforced some of my ideas, gave me some specifics I didn't really know. Line for line, it's not influential, but it was really helpful to sort of direct my ideas about eugenics. And then I looked up some other stuff about eugenics. So that was the motivation, the background for the book. So we have these characters. Again, Julian says at the beginning, I have a love story to tell, right? A beautiful love story. And so I have it's also a college novel, which is kind of funny because nobody ever mentions that in his interviews. It's a college novel.
It's true. But you don't spend a whole ton of time in college. They're just college-aged kids. And
well, we know their classes.
Yes,
we know their classes. If you were to go into Metropolis now, and you were to, you can't really do it on the book, and I can't really do it either. But if you were to take the college stuff references out, you get a really good picture of it, right? Because he talks about being invited to parties. They talk about being in the gymnasium, okay, and doing that. We know all their class. We know the classes for Freddie and for Julian. We know their teachers. We know the exams. We know what papers they're writing, what tests they're taking. We have an idea of what the dorm life, so to speak, was in Thayer Hall. Right. So it's just that we're skipping through the college part really quickly, but taken all together, it's a really good college novel. It's really good. You get the names of the people, you kind of get an idea of how they think about these people. So you get the idea that they know a lot of people in the college.
Did you do any kind of other background research on what you're doing?
I have a really good book that helped me for that. And it helped me for these epigrammatical expressions and everything. I have a copy from 1898 from Blue and Gold, University of California, 1898. Yeah, so it's got all sorts of expressions. Like I learned this, for instance, from this book. We talk about senior prom, right? Well, at this time, it wasn't senior prom. It was freshman glee, sophomore hop. No, freshman hop, sophomore glee, I think it was. And then it's a junior promenade and senior ball. Yeah, I think that's what it was. I think it was a freshman hop and sophomore glee. Anyway, so all this stuff, and so at the end, near the end of this, they have all the students in the 4 years and the professors giving one line of some quotation they like, and so I got a whole bunch of those and stuck them in different places. Early on in the book, when Julian hears this one guy talking about how the school he doesn't think there should be co-eds because they unreasonably raise the standard for everybody else. That was a direct quote from the Berkeley book. Even the person who wrote it, I cited it. So I think the character says, yeah, I'm reading this from a college journal, and I agree with this Hopper fellow, so that's directly from this book. So this was super helpful. So I got a lot of names from that.
You snuck a citation in there without actually having a citation.
Yeah, I didn't need to do it, but I wanted to, because it actually made it more realistic. It just made this person was writing from this journal. So I like doing that. I have a lot of stuff, and I have another book called the Arcades Project. Gave me an idea about the underground. And of course, I read the Aeneid, and that was really difficult to do the Latin and the English. Took a long time to figure out. I had 2 different editions of it, And
Well, you're a better man than I, because I wouldn't figure it out at all.
yeah, well, it was really hard. So I think what I did was, it's hard for me to remember. You got to realize, I mean, I wrote that book really fast. I think what I did is I read the Aeneid, there's Fagel's translation of it, Robert Fagel's, and I copied out the expressions I thought I could use in this puzzle. I didn't use all of them, and then I had to go into a book that had Latin and English and find the Latin use of it.
Wow.
Right? But the lines didn't correspond. So I had to read the Latin, only way I could find it in English was by names of persons or places in it. It was extremely laborious. I had them both open at the same time. And it was really, and then what I did was when we see Julian's translation, I would look up the quote and the translation, Google it from 4 different places, and make a sort of composite of it. So it's his translation. It's not directly from one source or another.
You're really making it up. It's truly made up.
Yeah, I just made I made up the whole puzzle. The whole thing about the Pashlavit oil, I made the whole thing up like that.
That's because I didn't know what that was. So I'm glad you said that. It was all made up.
I just made it up. I made up the Pajapiros. Pajapiro.
I need to ask you for a little bit about the act of publishing, being a published author. What are the things that you think that novelists starting out today don't get about what they need to do to become a published author?
I think unless you have a really hooky idea, like this woman, T.J. Newman, who wrote this book, Falling, about the airplane.
Right.
Do you know about that book? It came out.
I've heard of it. Sure.
Yeah. She said, airline pilot gets a notice saying, crash the plane or we kill your family. Okay. It wasn't a super good book, but she has another book out right now called Drowning, which is airliner crash and the water starts sinking. They save everybody. It is a better book, but that's a pretty good book. But it's an adventure story, but it's a hooky idea. Otherwise, I would tell people, if you really want to get published, then try to write as well as possible. Don't. I had a friend at the conference told me years ago, I'm not trying to write The Great Gatsby. I just want to get published. And I went to graduate school. I went over to UC Santa Barbara, talked to my emeritus professor, the chairman of my program. And he said, well, Mr. Schulz, I don't know why anybody would deliberately choose to be mediocre. Right? That's kind of what it is. It's like people saying they don't mind being the worst published writer in America, but you don't want to be like that. I have a friend who he did a blurb I guess he did the blurb for Metropolis, Simon Van Boy. He's a really, really good writer. And he was at the conference several years ago, and he told everybody, and they were horrified by this. He said, it's really not that hard to get published. And I think what he really meant is, if you write well enough, you will be published. I just don't. The people I know who have a hard time getting published don't really write well enough to attract enough attention. So again, unless you have some really good ideas. A friend of mine wrote Gray Eagles years ago. Dwayne Unkefer is about a German pilot attacking an air show in an old Messerschmitt 109, and so it's really interesting. It's a hooky kind of book, and it's a good book. But if you don't have another idea, if you don't have an idea like that, you certainly don't have a second one, you're going to be in trouble. But one might be enough to earn you enough money for the rest of your life.
So if you have a book that isn't hooky, going back to your early conversation about a literary novel that's not necessarily full of hooks, then you'd better be a doggone good writer, right?
Yeah, and also you need to read widely. I have friends at the Writers' Conference, I know, they don't read anywhere near as widely as I do. They just resist it. The commercial writers, I know a woman there who admits the only literary writer she's read at all is Raymond Carver.
Huh.
Okay. And she actually told me, she confessed, and she should never confess this. She goes, yeah, I tried to read the short stories by Flannery O'Connor, A Good Man is Hard to Find, but I didn't find them that interesting. Wow. Okay, that's the problem. Okay. No, don't even.
And she wants to be a literary writer?
But she admits she doesn't care about that at all. She even said nobody's publishing books over 400 pages anyway. They don't want that. That's not true at all. You see a lot of books. No,
that's not true.
I know it's silly, I was talking to a friend of mine from the conference, and he said, we don't understand why you read Stephen King and John Grisham. Why would you read that crap? Okay. What? I mean, you got to read a lot of stuff. So they're asking me, why do you read this? Because from them, I learned storytelling and pacing. Have something happen, move the story along. From the literary writers, then the people writing commercial fiction don't read. They're not going to read Bolaño or Bowles or Cormac McCarthy, those people, Faulkner. They're not going to read them. They won't read Philip Roth or any of those people. They're not going to. So therefore, the level of their writing suffers. They don't write well enough. And if they don't have great stories, and the pacing isn't good enough from writing the commercial novels, let's say you want to be a literary writer, but you're not going to read that commercial crap, well, then you're not going to really, maybe your book's not going to be that interesting. And maybe you don't write at the level of Bolaño or Bowles or those people, or Philip Roth, or maybe you don't write that well. So now what have you got? You've got a book that's 2 or 3 levels below literarily where it ought to be, and you don't have a really great story either.
And pretty much none of those writers you just mentioned got to be great writers by not writing. They wrote a lot. Right,
exactly. You can read this Bolaño book, Antwerp, is really good because look, it's really thin. This is the first thing he wrote, and it's so it's just, there are all these little vignettes, okay, and you read, if a person wanted to write literary fiction, could just buy this book and read and see how he writes, and this is really early on. It's as a novel, he calls it a novel, it's not really, it's a bunch of fragments, but you can see his fascination with language and events and little characters and everything. You can learn to, they just don't read widely. I read Twilight, I read 50 Shades of Grey, but I'm reading Bolaño and Bowles and all these people, and I'm reading Lee Childs, right? And Preston and Childs, I'm reading Dean Koontz and Stephen King. I read all those people. Are you able to read in your genre that you're writing in while you're writing? Sure, like I said, I read all the time. But in other words, you're able to read the style or type of book that you're writing while you're writing something like it. Nobody's writing like my book. Well, really, I don't mean to imply that you're writing like someone else. I'm talking about Metropolis is not going to be the same as a Cormac McCarthy book. It's a totally different style of writing. I got asked that at a Memorial Day party. What do I think about that? I said, well, I love Cormac McCarthy, but I said, I like my own book. I like how I write better because I can write passages that I feel are at the same level as his. I just have more, I have the kids in the book, right? That scene where Julian comes in and is talking to Delia. What are you reading? Rufus the Cat. Is it good if you're a baby? He doesn't have little kids in his book. I have little girls in the book, but I like having all of that. That's what I would get from Carson McCullers in The Memory of the Wedding, the kids, or from Harper Lee and To Kill a Mockingbird. No, what I do when I read the literary books, let's say I'm reading from Bolaño, right, while I'm writing Metropolis. So I stop, finish a little chapter, finish a section, and then I open up, I'm looking at my iPad, read my stuff. How is it reading? How is it comparing? I want to know that I'm writing at the same level. I need to know that. And if I'm not, then I need to write a little bit better or edit it or polish it or something like that. Did your book have an editor? Do you work with an editor? No. I have an editor, Gary Groth, super smart guy. He doesn't believe in editing his writers, because it's Fantagraphics, right? So he says, I might give, if I get a young cartoonist who's not really, needs some work, I might give him some guidance. But he published Alexander Thoreau's novel, Laura Warholic, which is like 900 pages or something. And then he published a book by Alexander Thoreau that took place in Estonia. He calls me up and he says, so Monty, he's got this long section on the Estonian language. I don't know what to do with it. I go, would you edit it? He goes, maybe cut it. He goes, no, I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm just saying, I don't really know what to do with it. What Gary says is he publishes the writer for how he writes. He said because most of their stuff is graphic novels and comics and that sort of thing. He can choose what prose writers to publish. He said, I only publish the writers I think are great, and you're great, and that's why I publish your books. So you're not used to then getting voluminous notes from someone? No, I did my first novel, Down by the River. My editor at Viking got around to it finally, like 6 months after I'd submitted it, and he gave me like 4 pages of notes, all of which I disregarded. I had a scene like 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through the book, these 2 characters in a schoolhouse, and they're kind of breaking up, Jack Clayton and Jane Crockett. And he said, I think you just cut that. I go, why? No, I'm not going to cut that. He goes, well, it slows the book down. I go, David, it's a 400-page book, and it's like on page 320 or something like that. Nobody's going to stop reading because they'll just skim. He goes, oh, that's probably right. But what I did do is I went back to a 4th of July party, Independence Day big picnic, and I shortened some of that. Made you get through that quicker. But other than that, no, I didn't. No. My writers. In fact, I didn't have a title. The book is called The Boxcar. He goes, yeah, my wife and Teresa and I are trying to come up with titles. I thought, so I'm going to come with a title. They're not going to title my book for me. So I said, okay, how about Down by the River? From the Neil Young song. He goes, okay, no, that's good. Okay, so let's go with that. All right. Right. So no, what Gary does do is we have a conversation. He asks a lot of questions. He doesn't line edit. He just asks me, how about this? Or if he sees mistakes, proofing, that's a mistake, and that's, grammatical or whatever. I don't make that many, but we had discussions about it. And then I believe in having good grammar. Not what Oliver Stone said about the Child Hearts River, where he said, my determinedly modernistic grammar, meaning I don't know how to punctuate, so just leave it the way it is. Okay. Massive numbers of comma faults and that sort of thing.
Oliver Stone does not really need to worry about his grammar, not in what he writes,
But he should in a novel.
In a novel, for sure.
There's no reason to make a comma fault error, right? So it was they didn't go to the beach that day, semicolon, too hot. Well, that's just a comma fault. Okay, why would you do that? Put a period, put a dash, put a colon. Just don't use a semicolon. The one piece of punctuation that's wrong, the only one that's wrong is the one he chose. And other people have done. I see it all the time. It's like, wow, do you not know that? It's not hard to do. Truman Capote was a master, he said, of the semicolon, and he was. So no, Gary would say, so he would ask me, there's a long scene of my character, Harry Hennessy, in Crossing Eden, in a big amusement park, like the Coney Island or the turn of the century. And Gary just asked me, so what is the purpose of this scene? So I had to go through the whole thing with him. And at the end, it took like 20 minutes or something. It was on the phone. So, well, I'm sorry, for grilling you like that. I go, no. I should be able to defend everything in the book. If I can't, then that's a problem.
Sure.
So I like the give and take. He didn't, though, line edit. I think there's a certain hubris on the part of the editors. A lot of them do. A lot of them think I heard him say that writing a novel is a communication. It's a dialogue between the writer and the editor. I go, yeah, okay, only if the writer's not very good. Are you kidding me? Somebody told me this at a conference up in Portland. I said, do you really think Truman Capote had an editor telling him how to write? I doubt it. Same with Cormac McCarthy. Doubtful. Okay. Faulkner, doubtful. Yeah. So you also hear the story about Lacombe Angel, how it was this massive manuscript, that Max Perkins had to edit. That is not true at all. It turns out that Dr. Matthew Bruckley and his wife looked at the original manuscript called Oh, Lost, and they read the whole thing. And first of all, they said it wasn't this big manuscript. It was 200 pages shorter than Gone with the Wind. So they said all Perkins did was take out the humor and religious references, the sexy stuff, the religious and the love stuff like that. And so they said at the end of their introduction, they said, "Oh, Lost is a greater novel than Lacombe Angel." Wow. And I read it, and it was really good. I could see what they're talking about, without comparing the two books, but line for line. But it was. But the reason why that book, that Oh, Lost, was published by, I think, South Carolina University Press or something like that, not by Scribner's. And I know that I glean that Scribner's did not publish it because they did not want this book appearing in contradiction to their mythologizing of Maxwell Perkins and his treatment of Thomas Wolfe's manuscript. But I don't think that I understand. I heard from an old agent of mine that years ago that the Anne Rice novels came in and they were just a mess and they needed a lot of work. But I don't know. Look at editors. You see when the writers have their acknowledgments to their editors and everything. Oh, gave me all this work, right? And really helpful. It makes you wonder, I bet they don't really write that well. And I bet they needed a lot of work, But my books haven't. They've been really, the Metropolis is the one you read is basically what came out of my head and went on the computer.
That's just terrific. Most writers, I think, need some kind of feedback, but you're saying you don't.
My editors would be the books I read. All right. I'm reading constantly, comparing. Also, you have to have what Hemingway called a built-in shit detector. You have to know what's not good. And I could see what's not good and I fix stuff. I've shared a paragraph or page with somebody who said, "Oh no, this is really good. You shouldn't touch anything." No, it needs, and I got to fix something. It's not working. No, I think it's great. Okay, it's not great, but it will be. And then I show it to them and they go, "Oh yeah, I know. No, that's a lot better." Yeah, okay, because I do know the difference. I can tell the difference. Pacing, because of reading Lee Child, for example, I have to make stuff happen. Move it along. Dialogue, narrative, action, that kind of thing. Move it. That's what I get out of reading it. Reading Lee Child, reading John Sanford, okay, reading Michael Connolly, and likewise, language-wise and story-wise, it's what I got out of reading, say, Isabel Allende's Island Beneath the Sea, okay, those type of books, and varieties of kind of dialogue. Right, philosophical, like you see in James Lee Burke, and light dialogue, like we might get in Sandra Cisneros in House on Mango Street. Those kind of things.
Well, you have in Metropolis, you have numerous times where it breaks out into some kind of, it just might be a line or two that's philosophy, and it's terrific.
Right.
And it takes you out of it keeps the pace up while taking you out of that moment into a thought, which is a very good thought that enhances the scene or the moment.
Right. Yeah. I think that's, I like writing and my characters speaking about things. So this sequel companion to Metropolis, Undercity, has way more of that. Way more of that.
This is the one you're working on now.
Yeah, I'm on like page 410, and I can control the length with this one better than I can.
And is this still Julian? Is it
No. The main narrator is Marco Grinnell. My name is Marco Grinnell. I'm probably insane. So it starts. So
that's a hook. That hooks you right in.
Yeah, I can't say anything else because then it gives away the ending to Metropolis. Sure. But so what the book has is a through line, Marco's story. So the four people that board the skiff, Marco, Mires, and then there's an older guy and a young girl. They're all, so the older guy's name is Geismar Brecht and the girl's name is Pyrenees. They're all assassins. And so they go back into the city from dropping, Julian off. But then in the book are like from Bolaños, I got the idea from the Savage Detectives, a whole bunch of vignettes, sort of little short stories from a lot of different characters around the Republic telling the story. So I have a bookseller, I have a policeman, I have the mayor, I have the lover, I have a physician. I'm going to have one called the orphan, one of the girls who comes from the eastern provinces, captured, put on the train, sent into Metropolis. We'll hear her story. One is going to be the soldier. I have maybe 28, 29 of them now. The policeman has 3 different vignettes to tell his story, just some of it, and then move on. And they're going to alternate it with stories with each other. There's the gypsy with Marco's story. So you boom, 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 boom.
Nice.
So the structure is completely different. It's somebody read it as like called it like a polyphonic novel or something like that, where you have multiple voices telling the story. Those are all Marcos. So everything is first person. Marcos is first person. All these vignettes are telling the story. So
the whole novel is from various first person perspectives.
Yeah, with Marcos being the longest. I think his right now is 145 pages. The other's the longest. Next longest is one called The Cleric. That's about 40 pages. There's one called From the Journal of Dr. Edward Charvari, which is a really good story. It's like 22 pages, and is about somebody who's clearly a sociopath, sort of like on Heydrich. His story, this student he had named Gailey Ames, has been in the eastern provinces and is responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of people.
Wow.
Clearly a sociopath, like Nazis. I had somebody asking me, they thought the book was like Metropolis was like too violent. I said, well, do you know how many people died in the Soviet Union in World War II? 25 million. Okay. So picture Metropolis like this. Julian is a senior at Heidelberg University in 1943. And so what goes on in the city, okay, and then the desolation is the war in the Soviet Union. So it's a model. I didn't write it like that. But
it occurred to you as you were writing it.
Yeah, because everyone said, "Wow, this it's kind of sounds like Trump. Sounds like what could be happening with Trump and us." I didn't even think about that while I was writing the book. I thought about that afterwards, but while I was writing, I said, "No." My friends are always saying, "So is this what you're writing about?" I go, "No, I'm writing about their time, their place, their time." Which is their time, right? It's not our time. People say, so when is this taking place? It's their time, but roughly would correspond to us technologically to about World War I, turn of the century, right? They don't have airplanes, but they have radioactive shells. They name machine guns, mechanical rifles. They name vacuum cleaners, motor dust inhalers, and they have all some different food, right? Different names of cars, but they're. Have you seen my website? Did you look at my website?
I have seen your website.
So you see all the lists of stuff and everything, the names of cars and all that. Yeah, it's really fun. And the slideshow.
So before we get too far ahead here, I want to talk for a moment about your songwriting, because you're also a musician songwriter. Okay. And do you think that I'm going to jump to a conclusion. You probably think of your songs as stories, correct?
I do have stories in them. I had one of the musicians who plays on my music say to me, this is about 7 years ago, he said, "So, Monty, your songs are kind of like stories." okay, because a lot of modern songwriting are like, I call them journal entries. I did this, I did that. There's no real story. It's like, okay, I get it. But if you have 9 songs about yourself, I'm kind of over it. Okay, so
Sure. Do you think that your prose contributes to your songwriting and vice versa?
Have you heard any of my music?
A little bit.
So my ability to write makes me a really good lyricist, but I don't really see the connection really otherwise. The song people are so invested in songwriting. They're like, well, it's just as hard to write a really good song as it is to write a book. No, it isn't.
No, it isn't.
Books are so much longer. No, but the songs really they're sort of synthesized down. Okay, I have a lot of passages in my book. They're pretty synthesized down. Okay, so I don't see it like that. I see them also. Songwriting to me is all about the music. I've never picked up my guitar ever and sing, I think I'm going to write a song about. No. I make up the music. Sometimes I've had the music. In a couple of cases, I've had the music for a couple of years. If you look at that song, Days of Us, I actually have 2 CDs. I have Seraphonium, After Many Summer, and then Seraphonium, Days of Us. And the song Days of Us is a story. And Days of Us took me about 4 years to write.
Wow.
Because so I have to have the whole melody before I write any lyrics. Really, where I play the melody and I play it sort of humming through, da 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 for at least a couple of weeks before I'll start putting words to it. And half the time I can't figure out what the words are going to be. I have to figure out, so what's the song going to actually be about? Because I tell people, since I wrote these books, I don't have to write a song about anything, right? Because I have so much stories in these things. But so that was all about music. We did a show for my music called Seraphonium, and it was filmed and got in the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. And afterwards, Kenny Loggins, who was there with one of the singers watching it, comes up to me and he said, so let me guess, you write all the lyrics first, then put them in music. I go, no, Kenny, I've never done that. I just write the music and make up the words after. I'm just really good at it. So that's why it sounds like but you're right in the sense that I don't have very many songs at all that don't have a story in them.
Do you think that your ability to write music, that you are musically inclined, that contributes to the way that you write your prose?
No.
Not at all.
No,
it doesn't contribute to your rhythmic thinking or anything like that.
No, I've got that from if you look at Carl Sandburg's poetry, you'll hear the rhythm in my prose. He has a certain cadence to his prose, and I think it just sunk myself into that. And also from Spoon River Anthology. And then I picked up a little bit from Carson McCullers as well, and maybe Thomas Wolfe. No, the music is so different again, right? I mean, if I make up the melody, everyone is different. The only difference between songwriting to me and prose is that songs have a very limited geography. So you can't spend a lot of time on, you're really confined, you're really limited in what you can do.
Very, very narrow real estate.
Yeah, but I do have a song, but I don't let that limit me, like same with the book. So I have 2 really long songs, A River of Hearts, and actually they're both on the Seraphonium Days of Us CD, which you can hear it on, I guess, on YouTube. The song Story of My Life is also Story of My Life, and another one, A River of Hearts. Both have sort of long stories. And I just let the song was the length it needed to be to tell the story.
Sure.
Right? So, but some songs are short, some are longer. They're all kind of different. Yeah, Kenny said, piece of advice: make smaller songs. Okay, dude, I have like a 2-minute song. Okay, maybe you should make, because the group he was playing with a while, they're really good. Blue Sky Riders. You look at the time signature on all the time length of all their songs, it was like almost all like 4 minutes something, right? So I would say, can you have some variation maybe? Okay, let the songwriting go where it needs to go. Okay, but write artistic music. I'm saying mine's artistic. Some of them are commercial, but I don't know. No, there's really a separation for me.
But it fulfills a different part of your creativity.
Well, I have not written a song now in 3 years, because I have 14 songs for this 3rd CD called American Dreams, sort of an immigration song. But anyway, it's and that's like 78 minutes out of 80, whereas is what you need in a CD. You can't be more than 80 is the limit. So we have so I didn't see music costs a ton of money. I wasn't making a ton of money, hardly anything else. So I thought, okay, this is going to be it. I'm not going to make any more songs unless I get hired to write songs. I'm not going to do it anymore. I will have 3 CDs, a lot of music, and I don't have any room for another song anyway. So whatever, this is the end of it. So really, I was in Hawaii for 7 months this past year. I have a house over there, and my guitar is on a stand in my bedroom up there. I think I only picked it up 2 or 3 times in 7 months. So the musical people were horrified. No, you should be writing more songs. But I did get a great compliment from this producer and a keyboard player, Brian Mann, who toured with Kenny Loggins years ago and still does arrangements for him here and there. Brian said, I'm sure your novels are really good, but music is what you should have been doing all these years. And I could have, except I just don't play that well. I'm like a mediocre rhythm guitarist. I can play to a click track. I found I could do that. I can even Travis pick to the click. But I don't sing well enough. I sing on some of my songs. I only sing on a song where I don't sound horrible. Okay, what sounds okay. So other than that, I'm always embarrassed when somebody says, yeah, Monty, a singer-songwriter. Well, songwriter. Okay. I mean, I don't think anybody introduced Burt Bacharach as a singer-songwriter. You know,
well, you could introduce yourself as a really good singer for a novelist.
You know, I think, honestly, with my own ego aside here, it's not really aside, but I'll tell you, I just know this. Listen, I know this, Steve, is true. I am the best novelist / songwriter in America. Okay, I just know it. I just know it. And if somebody would deny it, I'd say, okay, show me a songwriter who can write Metropolis, and show me a writer a book author who can write songs like I do. Because there is this writer, Madison Smart Bell, is a really good novelist. And I guess he was writing songs with some band, but it turns out he only wrote the lyrics. Okay, that doesn't count. No. Yeah, I do the words and music, right? It's got to be both. So I do think I'm the best at that, for what it's worth, which isn't anything, because I'm not famous. You know, I would sound really full of myself if I were making millions of dollars doing it, but since I'm not, it's just
the only one who I can think of who's now gone is Rupert Holmes.
Yeah.
Because he was a pretty good songwriter, and he also wrote novels.
Yeah, I guess I would have to. I don't know his fiction.
And he also was a playwright, and he wrote musicals as well.
It's possible. I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't.
He's the only one I can think of that would what you're talking about. There may be others that do what you're talking about, but I don't know who they are.
But you have to be really good at both. That's the thing. You have to be objectively good at both. You can't do them. You can't just do them. So anyway, it's sort of I find the whole thing just talk about it.
I have been having the most marvelous conversation with Monte Schulz about all kinds of things, mostly about writing and a lot about how you do this business of being a writer and how you produce novels and great works. And we're going to wind the show down a little bit here. And I'm just wondering, in all of your experiences, you've certainly met more than your share of people and had many experiences. Do you have an experience that you can share with us that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, oddball, or just plain funny?
Yeah, this is a good one. Besides, I was going to tell you how I write books, but my writing schedule, which is weird enough, but we've already heard that. So when I finished the book, I had first readers, right? So I had to sign the books and send them to my first readers. Okay, so I had 5 books. I had to buy copies because it helps sales, and the publisher can't send me any others. So I signed 5 books, and I had the addresses for the people I sent him to. One was Angeli Lizon, who did the cover, right? I mean, whose painting was the cover. Another friend down in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. Someone else in up in, I think it was in Washington State. Anyway, I had 5 I had to send out. So I went to UPS in Kailua, and I was handing the books. I gave the person there at the desk the addresses, and here's this one, here's this one, here's this one, we sent them all, done, right? 4 days later, my friend Sherry, who was up in Northern California in the Gold Country, said, I got Carol's. Oh my God. Oh my God. It turns out I did not check who they were signed to. None of them. All 5 went to different people.
Oh, wow.
What are the chances, right? Oh, wow. And I thought at least one. And then the next day, it turns out I'd sent 2 more, done exactly the same thing, and they both went to the right people. Wow, that's a break. But 5 books, all signed. I spent an hour in the store. I never bothered to check, because who can be bothered, right? I mean, just use the address. How could that happen? I don't know. That's stupid.
Were you able to get them exchanged?
They all sent them to each other, which was great. Okay. And that process took about a month. All right. So I was pleased that they all go, yeah, thank you. Wow. So
Well, it's a good thing that they're all friends of yours, because if they weren't, they'd be upset.
yeah, they're all, let's see, one of them again was Simon Van Boy, who was in France at the time. Okay, so for Simon Van Boy, he was from Brooklyn, and Angela was in the UK, in Bristol. And again, Carol Shelley was in San Miguel de Allende, Sherry was in Nevada City, and the other person, I think, I don't remember where they were, maybe in the Midwest, I don't remember. It was just pretty annoying, though. It's just impossible.
Yeah, well, that would definitely be annoying. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So, all right, last question for you today, Monte. You've already given us just an enormous amount of advice throughout the show, but I'm wondering if you have a solid piece of advice that you like to give to writers who are starting out,
right.
or those who are in a little bit and trying to get to the next level.
You have to read. I say this in every interview. I say this at the conference. I tell anybody, you have to read. You have to read widely. Don't just read books in the genre you're writing in. Don't just do that. Read as widely as possible and read often. Every writer I know who is published, especially the literary writers, but even like Stephen King reads all the time. Okay, he just knows all these books. He just reads all the time. He's a really voluminous reader, and you can always argue, does it show up in his prose? I don't know. I mean, I don't know what influences him, but he's a really well-read person, really smart guy. So you can't limit yourself. You can't read everything, but for God's sakes, read as widely as possible, and it will really help. It helps your writing, because I think reading is more important than having a writing group. I don't really believe in it, but some people do. They really get a lot out of it. I don't. But I just think that whether you're in a writing group or not, or you're sitting in an attic writing, if you read all the time, your writing is just going to be better. It's going to be better because you see the influences. So I would say, when people say, so what kind of writing group would you be in? I'm already in a writing group with Lee Child, with Roberto Bolaño, with Faulkner, with all these people. That's my writing group. Okay. So it's a huge advantage, and it's simultaneously a huge detriment to your work if you just cannot bring yourself to read. A lot of writers say, well, I don't really have time to read. Yeah, and then they go, yeah, I just finished a binging Game of Thrones. What? You don't have any time to read? Wow, okay. Yeah, I go to the movies. I just do this, but you don't have any time to read. Okay, swell. Right. I bet your writing is going to be super great.
Well,
okay.
I think that is really excellent advice for anyone that wants to write, because you really can't write if you don't read. There's no way around it. And so I think that's spot on. And I'm glad you said it, because that's what people need to hear, is you've got to read. And we're in an age where a lot of younger people have lost that passion and don't really read a lot. And they need to start doing that again.
Right. And I think that, we like to think that there was a generation before that read all the time, but it's really actually, I don't even think that's true, because in James Jones' novel, short novel, the Pistol, set on Waikiki, or set in Oahu just after Pearl Harbor, they're talking about one of the guys in the little company, I think, graduated grade school, and they put him in charge of the group because he was educated. So more people read now than ever have. We like to think people used to read. You hear people talk about, well, look how they wrote those really great letters back then. Yeah, those are the ones writing great. Those are the people writing really great letters. A lot of people were just illiterate. Okay, more people read now than ever. Even you say, well, kids are on the internet all the time. Yeah, but they're reading stuff. Okay, what's happening before this? Think about what's happening in the baby boomer generation, in our generation. What? TV, sitting in front of the TV. What are you getting out of that? Where is the reading there? Okay, but I think probably people read more now. It's just that maybe they're not reading what we want, but novels still sell, right? People make a lot of money at it, and plus the people who are really going to write don't really care what their neighbor's doing. They don't want to read. No, fine, don't. I don't think my family reads any of my books. They don't. I did a book signing in Santa Rosa at the Charles M. Schulz Museum. My sister-in-law showed up, and my stepmother, but my brother didn't, my nephew didn't, and my niece didn't. Okay. And my mom, who died last May, a year ago May, turns out she read my books, but never told me. Oh. She never told me she read my books. So people said, aren't you happy she read them? Why would I care if she didn't tell me? It doesn't mean anything to me. Why would she not tell me? So, and I don't think, I don't know that any of my family has read my books, but you just have to be self-motivated, right?
That's right.
You have to do it for yourself. And I don't believe in just writing for yourself. That's just writing a journal.
No, you need an audience in order to be a complete writer. You have to have the audience.
You need to try to publish. It's not important to publish. Yes, it is. It is important to publish. So at least there's some sort of validation there. I think if I didn't publish, I wouldn't write. Because otherwise you're just writing notes myself. I never kept a journal. I think I did one year, and it was pretty, I didn't really enjoy it that much. It's kind of amusing reading it later on, but yeah, whatever. Then I thought a few years ago, maybe I'll start it again. I think I wrote the first page and never did it again. I also don't write except for on my books. People say, Monte, you write all these books and your emails are like just 2 sentences. Yeah, okay. That's all you need, right? That's what I don't write emails. Okay. I mean, I'll answer yes, no, okay, maybe tomorrow or something like that, but I think people just, they don't write. So they like writing really long texts and really long emails, and that's their writing. I just don't do that. I'm pretty lazy. Yeah. So
you're far from lazy. Monte Schulz, this has been a fantastic hour plus on StoryBeat today, and I really can't thank you enough for spending your time and giving us all this wisdom and your thoughts about how the world works in novel writing and beyond. So I thank you very much.
Thank you. This is really fun. It's a fun conversation. Yeah, good time.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.